Okay. Y'all see the title, but let's get into it. So, some of my criticisms can also be talked about with the left as well. So, I'll try to mention those points here and there, but let's just jump into it with both feet. I'm listening to this bullshit from Nick Fuentes, and I'm seeing that he's lashed out a lot of people. Like I say, there are people who are on Twitter, apparently, and who cares? They were people who made memes, and because they had the sauna rat in it, they didn't like that. The thing is that the whole Nick Fuentes shit. It's just like, why do you think that somehow he's going to save something? He's not. But the thing is, though, Nick Fuentes is a perfect example of why the right fails. I mean, people think that, oh, the left will win, the right will win. Elements of the right and left may win, but to win the whole kit and caboodle, no, absolutely not. What do I mean by that? Well, certain aspects will be more left wing, maybe progressive, socially progressive, unfortunately, not economically. And you're going to have some conservative elements that are already there. So you're going to have a quote unquote win for the right in some way. This is the nature of politics. It's give and take, right? Ebbs and flows, yada, yada, yada. People try to treat this stuff, and they have to forcefully get people excited to say, well, it looks like the left could take over many countries like Brazil, or whatever the case may be. I saw populism updates or whatever it is on Twitter a couple days ago, and I thought to myself, who cares? I mean, to a point, it's like, okay, Lula gets in Brazil, what happens? I mean, he becomes a suck down. The thing is, in another way though, and then people will try to cover for him. I think this is the biggest problem, is that once someone comes in, they can't, do what they promised you. The Wignats, for a time, of course, Wignats will quickly try to jiggle the lens and will quickly try to reframe things to say, well, we supported Trump for a time and we dropped him as soon as we could. That wasn't until about 2018, I would say, roughly speaking. Maybe even earlier, I would say, but probably 2017, after Charlottesville, was when the real fuck you Trump came about. The America First gang, and people like, the Fuentes and the Beardsons and all that, hung on until 2021. I mean, they hung on as long as they could. And they were saying even before that, where it's like, well, maybe we just need to stop voting Republican, bro. It's like, wow. What made you think that somehow the Republicans were going to save you? The whole Groyper War shit and all that, where, wow, you got superficial victories, but it was nothing more than dabbing. That's all it was. It was, wow, we're going to have some base Catholics to take on, Charlie Kirk. It's just like, so what? They still have their money. They can still have big platforms and shit like that. What do you have, AF? What do you have, America First? Holding on to people like, I mean, this is the only time I'm going to mention him. Baked Alaska. Beardson Beardley, who I think has become pretty alienated from all this because now he's like, it was never about changing the thing. It was just about the memes, bro. Or people like Sean, who I think dropped out and who kind of disappeared because he finally realizes, like, he spent his time briefly as a wignat, did the Nazbo LARP, as I did, and then shifted into this AF stuff where he's dabbing on wignats and interviewing these various, and debating these various wignats and making fun of them, yada, yada, yada. And of course, crazy ex-girlfriend and all that other shit. But it appears as though he has left that world completely. Because it's not a brand, I mean, it's not his whole life. I imagine that he wasn't getting that much anyway, so I imagine he just left. But anyway. And now you have them fighting amongst themselves. Now, this is also something that happens with the left, but for different reasons. I'm going to bring it back around to the point that I did make earlier about once they get into office, they make excuses. For different reasons, though. The right thinks that when they get somebody in office, that they're just going to abolish the Constitution and they're just going to set everything ablaze. Rah! And to a point, there are some left-wingers who wish that as well. They want the destruction of this country. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but they think somehow with this new president or this new whomever that they're going to enforce some things. Now, here's the difference, is that, in my opinion anyway, and this is my bias, the right wing in general, to a point, there's plenty of exception to this, wise up quicker and say, no, fuck that guy, he's just full of shit. Whereas the left will hang on to people, mostly out of fear and more of a we don't want to give into the narrative sort of thing. Like, they don't want to give into the conservative MAGA P leanings that Joe Biden is, losing his marbles, and the fact is that he can barely stand up straight, and, the jobs plan didn't really go the way you think it will. But of course, people make their excuses. They'll stay loyal. The left wing in general, in my opinion, are much more loyal to beliefs, whereas the right wing are loyal to people, to a point. I think that's the difference. That, in my opinion, is the difference. The left, now, I mean, you can learn something if you're right wing, and if you genuinely believe abortion is evil, then you'll support whomever. Now, to a point, the right does this, with people like Jimmy Dore standing up for, defending TERFs or whomever else, and they will simp for whoever their beliefs are. So it's not completely, they don't completely give in and say, well, but it's lip service, and ultimately it's virtue signaling. They'll say, we support this person for the value it provides. And if we can get our claws stuck into these folks, some of the more disaffected people, then we have a better army. Whereas the left is much more, I hate to use the word united, but they're much more behind general ideas. And so they'll say things like, well, we don't like Vosh, but we still support transgenderism, right? And they still have to give that disclaimer, like, we support trans rights and all this sort of thing. Now, some MLs will just be like, no, we don't care about transgenders. Now, those folks are considered, tankies and everything else, right? But that's where it stands right now, in my view. In my view. There's an imagined idea of what America was that I don't think ever fully existed. It was better than what it is now, but it was far from perfect. And they, like I say, they had to give into pressure as well to maintain whatever power they had. And the tide turned against them. Now, don't get me wrong, to a point, I feel that the right, I don't even want to say right-wing movements will win, but reactionary views will win. All this sort of racial, white people bad, this and that, is very easy to simply X out in crayon white and change it to Hispanic, black, whichever, right? And that's the beauty of a lot of that rhetoric, whether it's, dare I say it, people like Ibram X. Kendi or whomever else, Ta-Nehisi Coates and all this other bullshit. Cross out a couple words, change some of the lettering, and change some of the words, and you can make it work for Hispanic people or with Jews potentially or whatever, right? That's the way it works. And so ultimately, here's my view, is that certain aspects will win while others will lose. You're not going to have like a pure like tradcath society, in my opinion. Aspects of it will exist, but you have to, this is the whole thing, is that both the left and the right are both mired in their larp. And they believe their hype and they sniff their own farts. They don't want to live in the real world. Wignats want to live like it's 1935 again. Like it's, because they don't want to talk about 1944, do they? They don't want to talk about the slave labor and all that. They don't want to talk about the fact that, they don't want to talk about those things. They prefer to talk about the earlier days of what could have been with the strength through labor, or excuse me, the strength through joy program. And, what could have happened with the, if Hitler had mass produced the Volkswagen, Beetle, instead of going to war, what would have been like? And all this, like I said, people play that game. Hell, I'll be honest with you. I've done it too. I try not to do it anymore. But the what if and the whole LARP fantasy of what things could be like, it comes down to the idea of the myth of what the United States should have been, right? I don't think it was completely this racist, evil society, that just slaughtered people mindlessly. It's like, I'm sure there was dissent, maybe to a different degree. Now, of course, people are going to be like, oh, of course not. They were all evil. Ah. But I don't know. I just, to me, there's a lot of the myth of what the United States was. And I think people genuinely think that they can go back to that. And they, like I say, I haven't read any of Buchanan's books, but I imagine they think that somehow they can turn back the clock to a point. And they can't. A lot of the time, even with America First, they think somehow if we just, just keep on making fun of the gays and whatnot while we embrace, cat boys and whatnot, that, we're going to be cool. I mean, let's get this out in the open. Nick Fuentes is not a Catholic. He gives LARP to Catholicism, but he's not a Catholic. He may even go to the church, but he's not a Catholic. I'm not even Catholic, and I don't. But he doesn't represent Catholic values in any way. Now, of course, you can say, "Well, what does that mean?" I know we're not gonna get into that debate, and Catholic Twitter, whether it's the left wing cast or the right wing trad cast, it's all cringe. It is. It's all bullshit. Arguing about the catechism and all. It's bullshit. But and the versus cast versus the prots versus the orthos. Oh, it's ridiculous. It really is. And it's them trying to portray that life, but also trying to live in the modern world. Nobody wants to really do that. People want to LARP about these things and talk about, well, we must do this, we must do that. But you got to meet people in the middle. And I think both the left and the right, they aren't willing to do that. I don't think they are. They aren't willing to meet people where they are. You have to meet their standards. If you're left wing, you have to be aware of transphobia. You must be aware of your privilege to a point. You have to be aware of what America has done, et cetera, right? For the right, to a point, it's lip service, where it's like, you have to loosely be these things, but only you have to be that way. We can do whatever degenerate shit you want to, but you have to turn a blind eye to it. So when Nick Fuentes with, Catboy Cammy comes out and he's looking at him and they're going on this date, basically, you're supposed to ignore that. When when you find out that Mike Enoch was married to a Jew, you're supposed to ignore that, or at least forgive it. When you find out that J.O. De La Rey was not only a federal informant, but had a relationship with a tranny, you have to go with it. When you find out that, I mean, we go on and on down the list, right? So while the left is much more about purity, I think I used to say this before, but I think that the traditional view is this. The left, in my opinion, is about purity of thought versus the right, which is considered purity of blood, basically. Loosely speaking, obviously, that's not really the case, but, it depends on what you mean by left and what you mean by right. But this is the false dichotomy that we live in, so we all have to play along. Anywho, I think in general, here's the real thing. Is that the left is about purity of not even necessarily purity, but we're going to stand on our own principles. And if you don't like it, fuck you. Whereas the right will say, this is what our beliefs are, but we're not necessarily going to follow them. But as long as you're loyal to the system or if you're loyal to the group and everything, we don't really care. Loosely speaking, that's my take. And that's just where we are. even though this is called the American right, I tried to attack the left as well and the right. Um, I don't, like I said, there's no real answer about where this is going. In my opinion, there's no clear vision. The mainstream left, I'd be very specific about that. The mainstream left, uh, they talk about decolonization in a certain way, but ultimately it's just, in my opinion, the left simply wants to accept this reshuffling, this recreation of the United States, this redefinition of what the United States is. It's no longer this about Protestant work ethic and working hard. It's about acceptance. And it's about fighting white supremacy and all this sort of thing. But also having a secret force of whites and Hispanics and Asians to keep the system going. Basically, being like an atlas holding up the world. But you have to keep them hidden so that you don't see that. That's my take. Now, of course, people are going to say that's pretty white nationalist stuff. Black folks can be in that too, and everybody, but there's that group of folks who maintain the system, whether it's, accountants or, some politicians and also, builders, et cetera, welders, to a point, maintenance people like me, refrigeration technicians, et cetera, right? Whereas, the right would be like, well, we have this pure system and everything else like that, but we're going to ignore uh, certain other things and the corruption that exists or whatever, right? So that's really where we're at. Where is it going to go? Your guess is as good as mine. The left in the United States will continue to push for Democrats, using it as a shield. As people like Vosh have said, it's a meat shield. The Democrats are a meat shield to protect them from criticism. They're basically, he calls them meat shields, but basically, human shield is what he means, in the most vulgar sense. To say that AOC is going to be used as a sacrifice. Or, Kirsten Sinema is used as a sacrifice to say we are going to lash out at people that are going against us. It's okay when this person makes money because they're converting people. But it's not okay for you to because you're, supporting pharmaceuticals and all this other stuff. So you're not good. Whereas the right, on the other hand, broadly speaking, fight amongst themselves, continue to, go on, like the Ralph retort and whatnot, pretending as if anybody's listening, apart from feds and Antifa and feds, same thing, basically, who are listening in and are just laughing, basically, and realizing that these people have no power. These fed ops that exist, whether it's the Order of Nine Angels, whether it's these various libertarian groups who have informants, and so there's a lot of, mistrust, and there's this sort of, I may believe these things, but there is no group that represents me. That's how the right feels. Whereas the left, it's either you go with us down this sort of path for social progressivism, but if you veer from that and you talk about Stalin or whatever, then you're a tanky. Get out. So that's where we stand. Where are we going to go from here? Your guess is as good as mine. Anyway, this was a long enough video. I hope y'all enjoyed this, or I hope y'all stick around just for 5 minutes. I don't even care. You don't have to listen to this whole thing. Just for 5 minutes, and then you can move on with your day. Anywho, see you later. Goodbye.